welcome to the last in this exciting series that you've all been attending. I could say we leave the best for last.
I'll take it.
I know you would. Leave that up to you. Once again, I won't take up any of Doug's time in introducing him because an audience of journalists has already done all its homework and knows exactly who they're about to listen to.
Thanks. Good afternoon. Buenos dias. Sani Bonani. It's wonderful to come home to California. I was born in Northern California. As a child, I surfed from Black Beach in San Diego to Venice Beach, and a lot of the coverage that I've done over the years is in this state. So California is deep in the bones. The trip here gives me a chance to talk about the things other than the weather that bring me here. Especially a chance to talk to people who do journalism and public relations at a very high level and teach it at a very high level. In more than 35 years of journalism work as an individual practitioner and as a leader in media operations in top-ranked journalism schools, that's been my consuming passion. Training our successors, contributing to the renewal and improvement of our profession, critiquing the performance of media institutions on lines of ethics, effectiveness, and equity, and contributing to production of the best kind of new journalism around the globe. And since I teach narrative, I figured I ought to give you the narrative arc of the talk. So that was prologue. We're through it already, you'll be happy to know, and the rest unfolds in 3 acts. Act 1, present tense. I've been up to the last week teaching narrative on the undergraduate side and the graduate side, which anybody who does it knows is not exactly the same thing. 20 undergraduates, 20 graduate students. The graduate students finishing with me in a capstone course so they can walk out of the school with a capstone on their resume that includes a major published piece online in magazines or video. And the other thing I've been doing since I'm teaching narrative in the winter, was to be working on a piece myself, because I don't like to teach anything that I'm not doing. And so in this case, that meant I'm only to the pitch stage at the Atlantic on a piece about the Cameroonian soccer player who fathered the tennis phenom and pop singer who fathered the amazing American basketball wizard Joakim Noah. And so that's a sports analogy for the kind of hybridizing, globalizing story that we tell and that journalism at its best tries to tell. So I'm pitching that. We'll see. Anybody who's covered celebrities knows long negotiation with Joakim and an equally challenging task of convincing the editors of The Atlantic that it's the proper place for that kind of piece, but I'm making that fight. I had a last couple of words with 13 undergraduates who were sending to Cape Town and Johannesburg to work in South African newsrooms. I've been working in that program ever since I went to Medill in 2004. It's the annual competition with IRNA to prove which school prepares the best international reporters. And since this is Little Switzerland for the purpose of this talk, I won't say which ones I think. I've been working hard on launching for the first time a class in reporting on LGBT issues at Medill. Seems a little odd to say for the first time, because in this respect, we have been far behind you, and much of the preparation for teaching that class is actually liberal borrowing from 3 of your colleagues. I've been all around the country speaking at universities, bookstores, churches, meeting halls.
Bus stops. Bus stops.
Bus stops. I'll sell books on bus stops. And some of what I've been thinking about in terms of the future of our schools and what we ought to be doing in recruitment comes from getting around the country in that way, having a substantive conversation with people outside the normal ambit of the audiences we might be talking about on a typical recruitment effort. I've been leading a subcommittee on recruitment and retention for our diversity committee, and we are taking to the faculty in a couple of weeks our recommendation that the school commits itself to diversity in the graduate student body based on 2020 census, demographic representativity, commitment within 5 years to get there. And the last thing, we have a brand new dean, and we've been engaged in a faculty-wide revamping of the graduate curriculum, from top to bottom, from recruitment messages to what we do to place people in their first jobs, and making sure that the terrific misalignment that we've had in the last 5 years is aligned, that the message that somebody gets when they're recruited is the same as what's delivered through the program, and that the outcome is predictable for those students. So that's where I've been. That's what I've been doing, and that is Act 1. We're already into Act 2. That's going to unfold in the course of a couple stops on the map. Past tense, stop 1, Salinas, California, was my first big internationally important story. Was the farm workers' strike of 1979. I was completely unprepared and unqualified for being thrown into a situation in which that strike unfolded, and I was the major reporter for it, partly because I could report the Spanish, and there weren't very many people, other people in the newsroom who could. It was an experience that there are certain things that sort of work their way into your DNA, and this was one of those experiences because I was in a newsroom where my bosses' families were working as strikebreakers, and for whom the dividing line of Highway 101 meant that a newspaper that had been identified only with the west side of that divide, suddenly the major story of our time in that town was implicating the lives and reality of people on the other side of that line. And it was, I guess the short way of explaining what effect that had on me was to say that in my benediction in daily journalism, there was this necessity of reaching across those lines of language, national origin, legal or unlegal or illegal, and to create coverage, award-winning coverage that hung on to the audiences on the west side of the line and gained new audiences on the east side. The only reason I survived in that period was because newsstand sales shot up in the east side of Salinas. I'm quite clear about that. And one of the results of that experience was that we had a kind of bottom-up revolt in the newsroom. Two other reporters, Rick Rodriguez, who some of you know, and Cheryl White and I, just said, we've got to do something about changing the demography of the people who are telling these stories. It shouldn't be me, because I know Spanish, being the only person available and qualified and trained in order to tell that story. So we started a minority internship program that became a kind of model for the Gannett Company and became a kind of model for what other newspaper companies did as well. The success of those interns also had an effect on my survival there for for a couple more years, and I'm deeply grateful for the experience I had in daily newspapering, and to have happened to arrive when a really big, internationally important story happened. Step 2, or stop 2 on this memory train, Oakland, California, the Center for Investigative Reporting. That was a founding period of what has become a much bigger and more effective organization that develops stories and has partnerships with the Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism, with commercial outlets, in stitching together the journalism efforts of many different groups and putting them out in high-impact mass media outlets. And I saw a kind of early glimmer in the possibility of these kinds of organizations with a project that I ran at CIR, which was to research and develop story ideas for the CBS News show 60 Minutes. So we would go to CBS or other big media outlets with investigative ideas, and sometimes, like in the case of the profile that Ed Bradley did with Cesar Chavez, or the early piece that we did on the sanctuary movement, or the profile of Fred Korematsu, for example, or with Mike Wallace, exposés on wrongdoing by multinational pharmaceutical companies. What else did we do with Mike? Oh, a big piece on the dirty war in Argentina. So in those cases where they said yes, big impact. But we were semi-autonomous. So if they said no, that didn't mean we stopped doing the story, that we had to bury our leads and go home. Because we were semi-autonomous, we were able to take those ideas that somebody said no to and do them. And I would say during those years that I was at CIR, the organization really made its mark, not in pieces that I did, but that my colleagues, people like David Weir did, covering environmental issues, including some of the earliest work on climate change, which was then widely dismissed in journalism as an area that you'd want to cover. So, great period, great training ground for a new generation of investigative reporters. We were hungry, we were eager, we learned a lot by wobbling back and forth from that kind of freelance zone, semi-autonomous zone, to working with the most high-impact outlets in the country. San Francisco, California, I was an investigative correspondent for KQED television, doing all kinds of things. We made half-hour documentaries and hour documentaries on a whole range of subjects, and then cut 10-minute versions of those for what used to be called the McNeil NewsHour. So we had a Northern California audience for really deep exploration of these kind of topics, and then we got national and international shots through the national broadcast. And that was one of those periods when you kind of wake up every morning and think, I really am in heaven because I've got both of those shots. I think the one thing when I look back on that period that's kind of a caveat is that so many of us, and I don't take myself off the hook on this account, missed the early stages of the public health calamity of our time, HIV/AIDS. And I mention it partly just to say that in a journalism school, in a journalism operation, we need to be prodding each other and prodding ourselves. We need to have a burr in our saddle all the time about those things that were missed. And our obligation sometimes to do stories that actually save lives. I think about, particularly in the context of where we're sitting, what it would have been like, for example, if Laurie Garrett, who later distinguished herself with her reporting on HIV/AIDS, had been a student here being taught by somebody like Casey Cole, and had the early intimations by talking to people at the medical school, and the depth of field on the scientific story. What might have happened if journalism schools were even more robust producers of original work. So that's one of the things that's on my mind as I think about where journalism programs are and where they could go. Stop 4 on the memory train, Mother Jones magazine. That was another kind of heaven. I ran the magazine from the spring of 1987 to the end of 1992, so I had 2 presidential campaigns. Right after the tenure of Michael Moore, who I understand went on to do other things. This job was a particular kind of heaven because I could drive to work in the morning and imagine what would it be like to send Jacobo Timmerman to go interview Yasser Arafat. Get on the phone and have Jacobo say, "I'll be on a plane next week." So that's a rare kind of pleasure and privilege that I had during that period. Or Roger Wilkins to go and interview a then unlikely, considered an unlikely presidential candidate in Arkansas named Bill Clinton. This one is what I want to come to. So I put Matt Groening on the cover before the show aired on Fox TV. And I just want to tell you about what the conversation was in the room when we were looking at the covers, because in those days we always did at least 3, right? We had a big discussion about what was going to happen on the newsstand. Well, this one, if we had taken a vote, never would have seen the light of day. Because most of the designers and most of my senior editors said, this show is going to be a flop. Homer is not a likable character. And the children are really irritating. And we love Matt, we love his strip, but we're going to be embarrassed because we're going to put this on the cover and then we're going to be dead. I don't claim, it's the kind of story you like to tell when you're right, so you never put up the slide of all the decisions you made that were wrong the same week. I had a wonderful art director who knew Matt, who had watched more of the show than I had. He made a great argument. We did it, and Matt was forever grateful and always willing to do covers, so we used him quite a lot. The most bracing part of that job was to do what the magazine had done for me, publish people for the very first time, identify talent and nurture it. In several respects, I was the CEO and the chief resident of a teaching hospital for young journalists in those years. And much of what I know about teaching narrative strategies, managing a staff, creating teams, fashioning a strategy for pushing a magazine brand out into the world, I began to learn during those years. Stop 5. San Francisco, Brazil. No, this was the news service, Palo Alto, Stanford News Service. After a night fellowship, I got a real lesson in how little of the most important work done in universities, in knowledge factories called universities, is ever translated for the general public. As director of the Stanford News Service, I made it my central mission to build out our website, help program a television station. I hosted an interview show myself called Interchange that generated maybe 50 interviews that are still seen late at night on PBS stations, all in the service of identifying brilliant emerging scholars whose work was important, but who were not on any journalist's Rolodex. So one example of the focus that we successfully placed on emerging intellects at Stanford was in the case of Claude Steele, whose psychological research on stereotype threat, I'm sure you know, and whose twin Shelby was far better known at the time. Op-eds, a profile in the New York Times Magazine, and Claude's own power, once you put him in front of a microphone in a radio show or got him on television, led to that brilliant summation of his work called Whistling Vivaldi, which I take as a kind of model in my own thinking about how we move ourselves into the diversity, the kind of diversity we want to live and work in. From there, I went to become the chief administrator of the Graduate School of Journalism at UC Berkeley. I came in with Orville Schell when he came in as dean, and I was the chief administrator, as I said, for 3 years. We created a visiting scholar program second to none after raising the money for it. And that was the program that brought Molly Ivins in to teach opinion writing, Laurie Garrett in to teach science writing. We had classes that were half journalism students and half PhD candidates in biology. Those people who went through those classes are still part of a network in the science writing field, in which those relationships that were established early on still hold sway and lead to really important stories. We put that school back on the map, I think. I hope my former colleagues won't take any offense at that. It had become a little sleepy. And we did big public events with the President of the United States, with major news anchors, Peter Jennings and the rest, not in the interest of pushing celebrity glitz of the school, but because there were conversations that could happen on stage in big halls around the University of California at Berkeley that put what was a boutique in a very big mall make a contribution to the larger conversation that was happening. And we also brought decision makers from journalism, from corporate life, from politics, right into the heart of our library. So there was a feeling that our students were listening in and participating in conversations about the urgent questions we weren't sure of. Not the kinds of things we would lecture about, but the kinds of things that were worrying us. Maybe WikiLeaks would be a current idea of what the kind of thing that you would do. So I was chief administrator there. I ran the admissions committee for 2 years right after 2009. During which we produced the most diverse and best classes in the school's history. I created, one of the things that happened when Orville and I got there is we decided that we needed to open something that was an outlet itself within the school. And so we leveraged friendships, particularly Orville's friendship with David Fanning, the executive producer of Frontline, and we raised the money, put it in an editing suite right below my office, and we opened Frontline West, which meant that all of our students had easy access to jobs as assistant producers and associate producers, and then once they left the school, were in line for pitching for Frontline World Peace. What I did when I went back to a faculty role was to take on the job of helping invent the editorial architecture for Frontline World. And many of Sandy's students were active in that process because they were doing things, deep immersion reporting all over the world, the kind that was natural for Frontline World. And I think, I guess what I would say about that period is that it helped me to understand what it meant to produce a web presence that was a companion presence to a big editorial project. A companion, but not a subordinate for it. but a big editorial process. And it's partly that experience and the experience at Medill, too, that has made me increasingly platform agnostic. To understand that for teaching purposes, digital becomes the center of our enterprise, but I'm not really interested too much in the fights that we've had. We've had enormous fights at Medill about which delivery options privilege, as opposed to what is the storytelling demand and the reporting demand underneath it, no matter what delivery endpoint we're going for. All during that time, I continued to write for magazines, and that's something I'll do until the day I die. I'm deep in my DNA is the interest in feature storytelling. So for magazines like the New York Times Magazine, for Rolling Stone, for Smithsonian, and for the Atlantic, that's where my own creative work is most regularly expressed. Stop 7, and you'll be happy to know that's the last stop on the memory train before we get to you. For the last 9 years, I've been in a kind of orbit from Chicago to Johannesburg, running a program there, as I said, which sends undergraduate students to newsrooms involved in a triple-level challenge to do the cross-cultural exchange that has all of the challenges that you know about in terms of what undergraduates go through in that kind of exchange. They go into newsrooms, acculturate themselves to those newsrooms, and then they produce professional quality work for South African readers and viewers. And we do that with one preparation course taught alternately by Lauren Guglielmi and me, that in 10 weeks gets them ready. And we use that as a kind of universalizing model for what you would need to do to go and cover someplace that's very different from the experiences you've had before. This was a massive exercise in what I teach, which is how to immerse yourself across lines of nation, culture, language, orientation, age, expectation, and the rest. It resulted in a book after Mandela, The Struggle for Freedom in Post-Apartheid South Africa. That book is an effort to explain an apparent paradoxical reality, but a place that is among the most violent in the world still, including combat zones, and also a new democracy, step by step moving closer to the goal of creating a non-racial, non-sexist, non-homophobic, more egalitarian society at the center of that. I won't say more about the book except to say that to invite you, if you're interested in that part of my story, tomorrow night I'm giving a reading at Esalen Books, 7 p.m. It's up on their website. I'll be talking about the reporting behind it. So, Act 3, the future. I want to turn now to how the past and present might relate to your search for a new leader. Let me link some of the experiences that I've had and that I've just jammed through 35 years in 15 minutes to pose some questions I've been thinking about. Because the most arrogant thing in the world that I could do is arrive and say, I've got it figured out for you, from the granular to the programmatic. This is what you need to do to change. But I'll use a little bit of arrogance based on the experience that I've had to pose the big questions that I think face you and face us at Medill, face every journalism program in the country and around the world. I expect that by now you've read the new Pew Report, and as a result have been barking at your partners, children, and friends the past week, taking frustrations out on those who don't deserve it, or thinking maybe of alternative careers you might have pursued in medicine, business, or space exploration. There's plenty of useful data in that report, but most of us use it and reports like it only as an updated version of Chicken Little. I remember all the people who told me that I was making a huge mistake when I decided to leave Freelance Magazine writing for a while and go to the Salinas, California, that daily newspaper experience that I told you about, because everybody knew that newspapers were dead. It was over. The sky had already fallen. That was 1978. Certainly there are trends we need to track and shape decisions around. Domestic newspaper newsroom employment down 30%. Revenue projections down for newspapers and magazines, and ad sales off. Audiences down except for radio, cable, and digital. And the launch of Narrative Science, a service used by Forbes magazine and other outlets to produce news by the use of algorithms. No reporting necessary. We should explore the trends more deeply, find the right openings for ourselves and for our students, and adapt our work quickly in ways that respond to the challenges revealed. But we also need to break out of an assumption that the American story is the world story. So the first question is, are we global enough? Are you global enough? I'm asking. Are you global enough? Well, the correct answer is no. No actually verbalizing of it, but I did see a few no's. So the follow-up question, of course, is how do we make journalism programs more globally robust? First, we do it by forcibly, intentionally expanding the gyre of our perspective. In the places where I've taught, at Stanford, at Berkeley, at Medill, we responded to the disruptions in economic models for domestic news media operations by refashioning curricula largely based on a constrictive view of domestically constraining circumstances. Maybe that was inevitable because 3/4 of all the revenue that was lost in newspapering around the world was lost here, but it was distorted in terms of the way we thought about what the global future is going to be, where newspaper circulation is up. 2.5 billion readers daily, up in India, up in Africa, up in Asia. Fully 2/3 of the world's population lives and works or doesn't work between the Tropic of Capricorn and the Tropic of Cancer. And there's a ravenous hunger for both new forms and old forms of information exchange. What does that indicate to us? It ought to mean that we recalibrate strategies for recruitment, provide flexibility in the content of curriculum, and reconsider the mix of opportunities for breadth and specialization depth we offer our students. One of the things that I would explore right away if I was here would be an expansion of offerings that appeal to Spanish and Portuguese speaking students in the U.S., or Latin Americans with good facility in English who would like to cover either the U.S. for Latin America or Latin America for the U.S. And I think that would put Annenberg more firmly on the map with a rising reputation and influence across the globe. Similarly, what is the school's pivot to the east? With new initiatives on the study of Asia on the drawing boards here at USC, the school needs a similarly robust strategy related to covering and preparing our students to cover the world's ascendant superpowers. We should not be bound in our thinking by whether there are expanding numbers of jobs in just one category of domestic offerings, print newspapers. We should be prodded to connect distinctively skilled students to the best jobs in journalism and public relations everywhere. Every superpower and bloc of countries has a BRIC strategy, an approach to understanding, exploiting, and responding to the future-shaping power of South-South trade, relations between Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Any forward-thinking journalism program should have a BRICS strategy, too. Question number 2, it's a corollary, it's a direct corollary. Are we local enough? I don't have to tell you that you live in one of the great hybridizing, postmodernizing, globalizing cities in the world. Neon Tommy, your broadcast offerings, the other aspects of your digital imprint underscores this point every day. As legacy media pulls back from meaningful coverage of the city and the state, failing the responsibility to tilt forward, there is greater room cleared for us. That's the flip side of Chicken Little. Our role in preparing people for the life they'll face tomorrow is greater than ever before because there's space that's being that used to be occupied that could be even more effectively claimed by us for original, groundbreaking work that reflects our own emerging editorial identity. The possibility of playing a much larger role in serving the news and information needs of Californians, for example, I could imagine rolling out in a couple of different ways. If the Eli Broad Group buys the Tribune newspapers, the opportunity for a certain kind of cooperation with the paper may be different than what you've had before, and in the digital suggestion of expansion of digital operations that's included in that bid might provide some opportunities. If, on the other hand, Rupert Murdoch or the Koch brothers buy the papers, you laugh, but the bid is strong. Very real possibility that is what Los Angeles and Chicago are facing. There might be a sense of even more urgent need for the kind of building out of the strong infrastructure you've already got in that area. And especially if there was a pivot to the south, and obviously between what you would be doing with Latin American students and the kind of universalizing experience of covering a great city that they might have. And the knock-on effects of that, obviously for undergraduates, would be tremendous. Third question, are we diverse enough? Well, here I'm sorry, but there's another rhetorical question. If you look at the ethnic categories currently, compare them to the demography of journalism schools and the makeup of media outlets, in 2013, people, it ought to make you angry. Here's the statewide picture. And of course, trends have long tails. It's going to take sustained, high-level, consistent efforts to move up the curve. Our professions are behind many other industries, and our schools are not yet graduating enough students from working-class backgrounds, from underrepresented groups, who finish and go on to satisfying, sustaining, influential roles in our field. That's our failure as a group, as a collective. In this respect, Annenberg, under Geneva's leadership, has been a big contributor to change, and frankly, a great prod to us at Medill, who are fighting this fight. We have to build on that experience and rapidly accelerate progress. To do so, of course, you'll need orders of magnitude more scholarship support. If you were to invite me to lead you, I would pursue with your dean and with private and public funders an infusion of money towards scholarships to mark a much larger proportion of the graduating class among graduates of 2015 as a full carry class. That would also give the school an opening to recruit much more effectively during changeover of administrations, Columbia, Medill, CUNY, Berkeley. There's an opportunity, there's an opening for recruiting the very best graduate students and to do what we ought to be doing, which is to achieve excellence through diversity and not to be drawn into any false idea that those two things don't happen at once. They are part of the same thread. One point I'd like to make about that effort in terms of the way it's unfolding at Medill is that often that kind of push is something that the underlying assumption is that there's a position of the institution of noblesse oblige largely by whites in power. And as a result of that, often those efforts fall disproportionately on black faculty, black staff, brown faculty, brown staff. And the conversation we're having at Medill is the kind of conversation that, of course, should be happening here. I'm assuming that it's happening. That my investment in driving the institutions I'm part of to be excellent and diverse is as great as Ernest, maybe greater. And that any student of privilege can't really know they belong here, or are being promoted based on their skills and talents, if they're not being competed with across the board. If these systematic constraints against inclusion in our professions are not taken away. So, question number 4, is the school the kind of resource it should be for thinkers across campus and for decision makers, including new leaders of our profession, to engage right here with one another and with us to discuss the most urgent and important issues like those and other things you might think of? Journalism schools can play a much more robust role, and that's the experience that I had at Berkeley in seeing the creation in organic ways of cross-discipline work that came out of having events that would draw people in. Question number 5, the last one for the moment. Are we focused intently enough on our essential social function? Have we allowed the disruption of old systems, the medium, to divert us from the message, the enduring power of story? A few weeks ago, I got a welcome reminder of this when David Isay, the inventor of StoryCorps, came to Medill. And you all know about that project, right? So tens of thousands of archived interviews around the country, where people are just asked to go into a van with the most important person of their life and in a guided conversation, then tell their most precious story. And David had such an influence on our students when it came to talk that for the next couple of weeks we were going to those pieces and using examples. His visit brought me back to the beginning of my career, and the example provided for what I wanted to do by Studs Terkel, that legendary figure and oral historian. So I'm in trouble.
What has happened to the human voice? Vox humana, hollering, shouting, quiet, talking, buzz. I was leaving the airport, this in Asmana. You know, you leave the gate, take a train that took you to concourse of your choice. And I get into this train, dead silence, few people are seated or standing. Up above you hear a voice that once was a human voice, but no longer. Now it talks like a machine. Concourse 1, Fort Worth, Dallas, Lubbock, that kind of voice. Just as the doors were about to close, pneumatic doors, one young couple rush in and push open the doors and get in. Without missing a beat, that voice above says, because of late entry, we delayed 30 seconds. A couple just committed mass murder. You know, I'm known for my talking. I'm Gabby. And so I say, George Orwell, your time has come and gone. Expect a laugh. It's laugh. They look at me. And I'm with a couple of real cowboys. Good Friday. And then I said, my God, where's the human voice? And just a little baby, maybe the baby's about a year old or something. And I say, sir or madam, to the baby. What is your opinion of the human species? So what does the baby do? Baby starts giggling. I said, thank God, the sound of the human voice.
So, I think the thing we need to be thinking about, to be addressing, to be struggling with each other over is what are the enduring values that we're leaving our students with? What will endure for students when they've been through our programs is the desire to dig out important information, frame essential stories, grasp narrative power and possibilities, gather it all together and present the story in an accessible way. These are the life-changing lessons that will matter most to our students. Even skill across platforms and depth of field and specializations is not enough. Increasingly, what is valued in journalism and public relations is deeper understanding of how narrative structure itself works, the forms of stories, the approach, framing, language, and tone that's ever-changing. Partly because we have as our students the first generation to grow up entirely online. Developing antennae for story form, recognizing it, breaking it down, and then doing even the harder work of participating in the shaping of new story form is the kind of value-added intellectual enterprise consistent with the calling of a great research university. How we navigate on that terrain, globalization, local responsibility, diversity, the power of new narratives, and making this journalism program even more of an essential meeting ground for thinkers and decision makers will determine the shape of your future, I believe. Those 5 elements inform everything I've done so far in producing journalism and training the next generation of journalists in one capacity or another. I look forward to closer collaboration with you all as we drive to the heart of our ongoing mission together, which is to change journalism as journalism changes the world. Thank you. So I'm ready for argument, questions, debate, insult.
Time for the human voice. Phil, go for it.
Thank you. That was an excellent presentation, I thought, and it actually got to a certain degree to the job that is in question here. But one of the things that struck me, and this keeps coming up, is there was a lot of talk in there about technique and different media and how people report and that sort of thing. What about the issue of what journalists know? Are you at all concerned about the danger that we will produce a generation of people who are very adroit in their usage of various media, and even with a properly globalized and diverse outlook, who doesn't know very much? And what sort of curricular approaches, you've probably dealt with this at Berkeley and at Medill, what sort of curricular approaches do you get so you don't have very skilled but not very knowledgeable people? And I mean knowledge not about the journalism.
I understand. Yeah, no, I understand the question. I mean, it's the question that goes back to the founding of journalism schools, right, in universities. It's how much those journalism schools are part of the universities they're housed in, and that tension across lines of, are we training people to be really good beginning anchors of local television stations, but not having the depth of field in areas of specialization. And in the programs I've taught in, sure, there's always been that tension. We had a big fight, with the most recent dean at Medill over this. But I don't see it, I see it as a creative tension. We, of course, want our students to be the very, very best producers across the platforms. We also want them to have deep specialization to be able to produce the best radio, the best television, the best radio documentary, the best magazine story. And so we have to make sure that we don't allow a separation to persist if it exists. That the big questions, the most important questions like creating new story forms for a new generation, is disconnected from what they're doing as emerging journalists or public relations specialists. It's got to be marbled in. When I said I'm platform agnostic, that means that in the magazine sequence I'm a part of at Medill, we've gotten rid of those distinctions. We don't teach skills only. We don't teach survey discussion separately. We do it together. We do it in the same classroom, in the same project. So the big question about what were the ethical questions that came up for you on that piece when you went to the South Side, maybe as a white person, that is marbled into the discussion about that piece. And as a result of that, there's not a gap between the conversation that's being had and the story that somebody's working with. Because we're coming right back into the classroom or into the lab, and we're confronting it right there. So at Medill, anyway, we've moved people like me, who used to only see undergraduates when they became seniors, much earlier in the process. And on the graduate side, similarly, people are moving up and down that scale much more. None of us at Medill teach only undergraduates and graduates. There's a kind of sense, I think, that we've gotten. I don't know a lot about how this works for you. There's a sense that we've gotten that we are much better at teaching our graduate students when we have a sense of where they started and what they went through. Does that answer it?
Getting there.
Okay. Well, at least we got to start. Continue the conversation. Yeah.
I'm a graduate journalism student at Edinburgh. I have a question about diversity, because when we're trying to get an internship, they're usually not having internships.
They're unpaid.
Yeah,
Well.
and journalists and Jose Antonio Vargas say like these unpaid internships
Sure.
are a barrier to diversity, because only one
Sure.
affluent people can afford all those unpaid
Sure.
internships. So what's your thought about
I
that?
think it's a huge, obviously a huge obstacle. And you're a graduate student or
Yeah,
undergraduate?
graduate students.
So the way we face it at Medill all the time is we say, oh, well, we're recruiting everybody, we're making a big effort to bring everybody in, and then we've got placements for internships, unpaid internships in Manhattan. Well, what are the students who can afford rent in Manhattan? And so the struggle that we're having as faculty now is to equalize that. One of the things I fought very hard on and won with the South Africa program was that is a full support program. So the students pay tuition. So, we're not doing them any favors. We're spending a little bit of their money to make sure that any student, no matter what background they come from, has an equal shot of going on that program and being in Johannesburg and Cape Town. So that would be my approach. Of course, you can't stop at the recruitment level. You've got to look at all those retention issues, and not just retention to hang on to you for the full year, but to make sure that you have the same access anybody else would have to the key formative experiences that are going to make you a strong prospect for employment in a great place when you get done. So I realize that's a sort of general answer, probably what you want to hear, but that is the fight we're having. Looking at every single program. I'll just tell you one brief story about how this comes home to us, right? So we did a big recruitment the last couple of years, especially among African Americans, and we brought in a critical mass of particularly black men into the graduate program. So this one kid that I've gotten to know and comes from a very, very poor background. He got to the school and he noticed, he was a big-bodied guy. He got to the campus and he noticed that everybody on the Northwestern campus is health conscious and, running all the time, And so he decided he would lose some weight and look like the rest of the students, right? So he lost 30 pounds in a couple months. And the problem was, he didn't have the money to buy the pants. All right? So that's the level we're at. We've got to be sensitive. We've got to know. It's only because my colleague Charles Whitaker noticed that, he looked like some of our interview subjects in South Africa, binding up his pants that were now 3 sizes too large, that led to, some of us raising the money so that the dude could buy some pants that fit. That's got to be not based on a few people noticing. That's got to be a kind of structural response to the fact that if you make the commitment to bring in underrepresented groups whose families have never had people go to finish undergraduate or do graduate training, that you have to be ready to deal with the rest of the cultural issues that come into play to be responsible. Yeah.
As you know, Doug, the enrollment of the program, the enrollment in the overall School of Journalism is split roughly 50-50, journalism and public relations. It varies a little bit, 51-49 the other way around, but in a nutshell, it's split, right? What's your
Aren't you actually, don't you have more students?
Slightly. Just slightly. In any case, how do you see that? How do you see the relationship between the disciplines? What are the strengths, the weaknesses, the risks, the opportunities?
Clearly the bulk of my experience is on the journalism side. I have 3 experiences that arguably are on the branding, public relations side. As a public face of Mother Jones Magazine for 6 years, developing that strategy, writing direct mail, negotiating with printers, being around on talk shows. I obviously had to think about how you push your brains out. When I ran the news service at Stanford for 2 years, I was making the connection between these emerging talents and the outside world. So maybe I don't come to the public relations question with the kind of bias that some journalists might, given that. I'll say, besides that experience and the experience at the Graduate School of Journalism, where I had to really think as well about what the messages were, the consistency of the messages going to the outside world. I don't have a lot of expertise in public relations. I don't have some kind of, the hair doesn't go up on the back of my neck. I certainly don't come with a bias against it. And I think that the main thing, if I was here, that I would be looking for, based on some of the conversations I've had in the last couple of days, including with your group, would be to look for ways in which you could get differences and synergies into the same room together so that you had kind of debates and conversations going on across those lines, and look for organic ways to work. Does that answer it?
Sandy?
Doug, you mentioned the idea of getting more scholarships. You also mentioned you have some, which I think is nice for a lot of us to hear. I think that's been a concern of a number of us, if not most of us. And you also mentioned you have experience in raising money at Berkeley. Things are pretty tight around here with the new building especially. How would you go about that?
Well, that's partly a conversation we're going to have at lunch. But I'll tell you what we did at Berkeley. When Orville and I came in, we knew that we needed 2 things. We needed to create almost a parallel faculty in the visiting scholars program. I think you came in under that, right?
Yeah, under something similar.
And we also needed scholarships for it. And we Orville's a master fundraiser, so I shouldn't even say we. But together, we did the proposals that raised about $3 million in the first 8 months. And that allowed us to do both. It's been a while since I've raised money. At Mother Jones, I needed to raise about $1 million a year, in addition to the contribution from the founder and chair of the board. So it's about a 65% earned income, and the rest of it was raised. So I do have some experience in fundraising. I think the history of the director's job has been that isn't something that's my understanding of it. But I don't have any hesitation or resistance to the idea that some of the things I would want to do if I came here would involve the need for new money, and participating and getting it is something that I would embrace. I don't mind fundraising. And when I was at Mother Jones, I actually preferred going and raising money to the calls on advertising agencies, because I'd have to go and explain to the Ford Motor Company account that yes, we were going to do the issue on exploding Pintos and we were going to put it on the cover, but nonetheless, they ought to do a big.
They get double the bang.
Now that was a harder sell than some of my fundraising stuff. But I learned some things by this as well. That's really it. No insults. No big challenges.
Okay, well, and we'll call into it then. Thank you.